And therefore, if it's that big of a challenge, it's better just to kick the can down the road and let someone else deal with it later. So there's been 100 years of kicking the can down the road. Meanwhile, to give you a very big picture of how much trouble we have at this point, we have a geopolitical order where our vital national security interests, which is a mantra here in Washington, is an actual phrase for oil, protecting the oil interest. The madness going on in the Ukraine and Crimea right now is 100% or largely influenced by natural gas and oil politics. Certainly the Middle East, anyone knows that is. People say, well, there's Israel there. I say, yes, but they have a couple hundred thermonuclear weapons and can take care of them. I know for a fact they do. So the big problem becomes if you have, let's say in 1927 or so, 1927, there were 2 billion people in the world. Now there's 7. So of those 2 billion people, there were very few people living with cars and electricity in their homes and et cetera and so on. Now you have 7 billion people and billions more people living on that system, which has become entrenched, bureaucratically built into our funding mechanisms from the state, local, federal level of support, and also where there are a lot of very powerful stakeholders. And so from a rational point of view, you'd say, well, these technologies would get us off of oil, gas, nuclear power, no more Fukushimas. But from the point of view of people who are looking at the national security equation from a macroeconomic stability point of view, this is their worst nightmare. Up the road here, between here and the White House, if you walk straight up the road here, you'll end up at the White House. It's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and we're on 16th Street. I was at the University Club with a man who was sort of the consigliere for President Bush Jr., W., a few years ago. And we were having dinner, and this is a place, you'd have Rumsfeld there and other people there, in this place having dinner or lunch. It's a private club. I don't belong to it, but I was invited. Actually, I had to put on a jacket. I was shocked and appalled. Anyway, so I did. And, he said, look, you have to understand that everyone who gets into that house, pointing to the White House, governs as a conservative. From the point of view of the classic definition, don't change anything. Conserve. Don't change. Keep things as they are. Tradition. Because when you're dealing with a change this large, this is what the people call a disruptive technology, but writ large. And disruptive technology writ large in this, how I'm speaking of it, is something that would have a multi-hundred trillion dollar impact. Not billion, trillion. So let me repeat that. Multi-hundred trillion dollar impact. Because once this is disclosed, and this backs into why, quote, UFOs are secret and forbidden to talk about in polite circles, is that a UFO is really just a misnomer for an alternative energy and propulsion device. All right? They are not moving using Exxon Jet A fuel. All right? They're not using a nuclear reactor on those little things. They're using this whole new area of physics, which is elegant, beautiful, life-sustaining for the planet. But if you said those were real, people would say, oh, how are they moving like that? Any physicist at MIT would ask this question if they thought it was real and hadn't been brainwashed by the psychological warfare disinformation campaign launched by the CIA in 1953. So that's the problem, is that if you begin to talk about the phenomena of new energy, free energy, anti-gravity, UFOs, you're stepping into an area that is the most sensitive, compartmented intelligence in the history of the United States.
All right, as you can see a little bit, let's go into this. Let's talk about one of the things that he mentioned was he said that UFOs are transdimensional. It's actually, the correct term is multidimensional, okay? And it gets into the part where he's saying that UFOs physics, it's a beautiful thing. Well, yeah, because if you go back to Project Blue Book, and I'm going to research these. I got these links, so I actually put them on my website at the blog. But if you research these things, a person in the Project Blue Book said, well, yeah, these things are real. These things are, but I cannot sit there and look you straight in the eye and tell you it's a physical phenomenon, which is what he's putting it for. He's putting it for the technology, the physics of it. This person also said, I cannot tell you if it's a spiritual phenomenon, because it's more spiritual than you actually understand. And there's a whole bunch of things that you really have to understand this. And like I said, with this person, I do not know where his goal actually is, because he continues to bring forth that certain people are credible, certain groups are credible, and every single bit of information he puts, like from the scientists to the universities to the businessmen and foundation, which George Carlin ripped, which we'll get to that one pretty much too. But George Carlin kind of even shown how much business people are terrible. But anyways, and if you're going to look at the world leaders, they're definitely not credible. They're part of the problem. Let's go back to more of it, and we can analyze the rest.
There was a time when I was willing to kind of play along with some of these inventors with their secret proclivities. That was a decade ago. At this point, the answer is no, yet, never, ain't going to happen. And the reason is, if I know what the result is going to be at the end, you'd be insane to start it at the beginning. All right? So it isn't for nothing that since 1992 and 1993, I've been having meetings and doing briefings for the head of Army Intelligence and the CIA director, and putting together presidential briefings and moving around with, getting Rockefeller to host the Clintons at the ranch to go through all this stuff with them. Some of this you know, some you don't. But you learn through those lessons. And what I have learned is where I started. Disclosure, complete openness about all these technologies. You cannot fix this problem from the consciousness that created it. And greed, avarice, secrecy, that's what's gotten us where we are. That is at the core of the massive oil, fossil fuel, national security superstate that we have built up around us. So if you use that same consciousness, you're not going to escape from that black hole. So we have to have a whole new consciousness that guides these endeavors, or we're going to repeat history over and over and over and over again. And that is the great tragedy of our time, is that because this subject is sort of the stepchild of science, and there has been a divide and conquer nature to all these inventors who, one will pop up in England, one will pop up like Stan Meyer in the Midwest, one will pop up in Australia, one will pop up in South America. And there are all these sort of lone wolves out there that are easy to pick off one at a time. So we have to come together as a people and do this very overtly, not secretively, with a proper public involvement, because the public wants this. 99.9% of the people on planet Earth would benefit from this. There is a very, it's not the 1%, it's the 0.0000001% who would not benefit from this, because they are the ones sitting atop the petrodollar system, the macroeconomic order, and particularly the fact that it is run, and everything we're using is run on a metered, linear energy source, even solar and wind. The big $2 billion solar farm being done out in the desert of California. I mean, that's a huge thing, but it's all centralized with a centralized utility. What happens when you have something that would fit on this table and it will run your house, pulling energy from the quantum vacuum or the zero-point energy field? You don't need utilities. How many people have stock portfolios with utilities in them? Bye-bye. You don't need ExxonMobil. You don't need BP. You do not need coal. So there goes all of Australia's coal exports to China. Unnecessary. Don't need it. On and on and on and on it goes. So there would be an impact. But if we don't do it, the impact we're facing is 1,000 times worse, which is a geopolitical order where you're likely to see a war in the South China Sea over oil deposits, where we have this situation now in the Ukraine and Crimea and with Russian gas and Europe needing it, the Middle East conundrum, on and on it goes. So beneath that is a deeper crisis. True statistic, 48% of inhabitants of Earth do not have indoor plumbing. So the old saying, don't have a pot to pee in, literally 48% of the 7 billion people on Earth. So we have this growing disparity between the people who have things and those who do not. But that is what happens, and it gets very extreme before every massive global revolution or war, like in the 1920s before the Third Reich rose. I think we have to begin to look at this and say, how can we stay on this path when the outcome is huge problems with the environment? Even if you don't believe in climate change as a result of fossil fuel, these other issues are going to catch us before that does. So long before we have a problem with the climate, which actually we're having a problem, the UN report that came out this week makes it quite clear. But even if you don't accept that in your paradigm, the inhumanity of keeping these sciences and technologies away from the public and the poverty that it engenders. Because I was talking to an industrialist from India, and he was telling me it would take trillions of dollars to properly electrify the subcontinent so that people have the energy they need using today's conventional systems, even solar, even wind, even coal. And you know, we're facing a situation now that every year or two there's 1,000 new coal-fired burning power plants being put online in India, China, and elsewhere, mostly without any scrubbers. So in the Pacific Northwest and other places, you have a huge amount of the pollution that's in the West Coast is coming from Asia because there's no scrubbers in those coal. And you look at the air in Beijing and Shanghai and other cities, it's not breathable. Then you go to the oceans, where you have the Fukushima reactor releasing all this radioactive material, and huge parts of the oceans, because there's all the CO2 going into the oceans, are beginning to die because of the acidity and alkaline levels being upset. So there are all these big macro geophysical effects while we're trying to maintain the current macroeconomic order. Big problem, huge mistake. But who's going to fix it? This is really the crux of the problem. Now, many people have asked me, given the folks I've met with over the years, why doesn't someone do that? But see, everyone says that. My wife and I this week were just up in New York meeting with the head of a foundation. And the question came up frequently with people there, all of whom were incredibly wealthy. Well, why doesn't Bill Gates do it? Or why doesn't the president? It's always, why doesn't someone else? Of course, if you go to the president, he'll say, no way, Jose. And if you go to billionaire X and billionaire Y and billionaire Z, many of whom I've met with, they'll go, you know, one of them once said to me, we all want to be first to be second. Great expression. You hear it a lot in business. When it's a very controversial science, no one wants to be the first to stick their neck out. So this becomes then a leadership issue, which is what I've tried to provide some clarity to in my own humble way, being not a significantly wealthy or powerful person at all, but knowing what I know, try to share it with the public and try to create a momentum towards disclosure, not only of the fact that we're not alone in the universe, but that the secret behind these UFO propulsion systems and energy systems would give us an entirely new planet. Beautiful. But there are stakeholders who are very, very powerful who aren't happy about that. Now, you know, at the World Economic Forum at Davos a couple months ago, it came out that there's about 17, they said 35, but it's actually more like 1732, and the Swiss Institute said more like 17